Hello, my friends. It is Mike here of the standard Star Wars comics in canon, and I am introducing for the first time the episode of these Mandalorian specials. Obviously, this is the fourth episode of them, and we are tackling Chapter 12. And I am joined by Dave of Comics in Motion, who has been basically spearheading this operation, really. It was your idea, Dave, so thank you for organising all this and stuff.
No problem at all, Mike. And you're like the Don Corleone of the Star Wars comics in canon, aren't you? Just when you thought you were out, we pull you right back in. So, no, it's brilliant to get on this chat, and really appreciate you. You know, I know you're really, really busy, so appreciate you can come on and, you know, give the listeners some of your knowledge. We've loved your little tidbits that we put in there, little Mike's nuggets, as I like to call them. But now we get the real thing. We get your kind of fresh take on the episode as well. And before we get into the actual specifics of the episode, so it's episode 4, isn't it? The Siege.
Yes.
Chapter 12. Mm-hmm. What have you been making of this whole series 2?
I have been absolutely loving it. I think I got a few people, one of the things I saw online is basically people didn't like episode 2 quite as much, I think it was, because episode 1 started so strong. But I didn't agree with them, in a sense. I mean, I think the thing is that series 1 was obviously a brand new thing, and a lot of people, because of the sequel trilogy, obviously the prequel trilogy causing issues, and then the sequel trilogy causing issues, a lot of people were like, Star Wars has lost it. They didn't look at it like Star Wars is just an intellectual property and different creators can make amazing things within the space of Star Wars, be it books, comics, or whatever. And so a lot of people kind of didn't necessarily pay attention to Mandalorian initially, and then when it got wrapped up with everyone going, oh my god, this is amazing, and people going, what? New Star Wars, amazing. And then by the time series 2 came out, like so many more people, like my boss at work, same for all of my friends, lots of people have like been watching Mandalorian that I didn't expect. And I think series 1 started off amazingly strong, but there was, in the middle, there was a bit of a lull. I still really enjoyed it, but there were 2 or 3 episodes that were just not quite as, probably story heavy, I'd probably say. They were just kind of like episodic individual episodes. Yeah. And series 2, obviously, episode 1 was absolutely fantastic. All of us book nerds and things were like, oh my god, Cobb Vanth, you know, he's in it. And it's like, anyone who hasn't read the Aftermath books is like, oh, Timothy Oliphant's wearing Boba Fett's armor. That's quite cool. And the rest of us were like, holy shit. Just because like characters that are created in the books, they haven't made it to the big screen before in that way. Mm-hmm. Like it's a weird thing that a lot of people in the Star Wars community have spoken about, and all the potentials it gives, because a lot of the time the books, they're not ignored necessarily, but like people who write the books, I'll use Claudia Gray as an example. She does a planet in one of her books, and then when she does a book that is set however many decades before or after, she can include mention of that planet in itself because she already knows it exists. And a few authors like that may do a bit of cross-pollination in that regard, but the Star Wars universe, because it's quite in its early days of being the new canon and stuff, not as many creative things have been able to connect all the dots quite as much. And the sequel trilogy was trying to connect this new whole chapter and things, and obviously it's disjointed directors and whatnot, while Solo and Rogue One, Rogue One did it very well, but that's specifically a prequel. So the movies are a bit more messy. Whereas this, created by Jon Favreau with Dave Filoni, who has helped create and make Rebels, Clone Wars, and Resistance, the animated shows, as well as all the other individuals who are involved with it. They're such massive Star Wars nerds, and you can tell that you watch any of the episodes that they do huge connections with the story group. And what I love about it is that it is accessible enough for people who have only seen the films, or even if you haven't really seen the films, you don't really need to know the plots that much, just vaguely the Empire are bad, Baby Yoda's cute, obviously he's called the child, but that's really all you need to know. Everything else, even things like the Force and Mandalorian and stuff, it gets spoken to you in a way that if you're a massive Star Wars buff, it's really cool, because there's all these little connections, and Bo-Katan appearing in one of the previous episodes and things like that. It's really, really cool. But I love how they've managed to toe the line so well of making it accessible while giving all these nods to nerds. And I think Series 2 has done an even better job of that. I think each episode is strong on its own while connecting to the overarching story, and the way they've they've teased it. Like they haven't, like a lot of people knew that Ahsoka Tano, Bo-Katan, and other people I won't name just to save if people haven't heard the rumors are going to be in the show. And so when I was watching it, and when Megan was watching it, she was like, "Oh my god, Bo-Katan's in the show," because she's seen Rebels and Clone Wars. But I already knew because I saw rumors of Katie Sackhoff is going to be in The Mandalorian, and everyone's like, "Well, she voices Bo-Katan." So it's one of those weird things where I really like the fact they're teasing because they're doing the plot. They're not giving everything up at once. That's basically what I'm trying to say. You know, I think a lot of Star Wars fans, they saw the first episode and went, great, every single episode is going to be hitting out of the park, 9 out of 10 or 10 out of 10, amazing, perfect. And then when the next episode was something a little bit different that I really liked because of its horror elements, and those spider things were fucking horrendous in a really good way, I feel like I like the fact that not every single episode is going to be a link to previous content because, you know, I'm the first one to say when they said Ahsoka Tano on one of the episodes, I was like, oh my God, but I don't want every episode to just be a throwback to the animated series. I want it to be strong enough by itself. And I think that the first half of this season has really shown that you can simultaneously, and kudos to Jon Favreau and all the directors involved, they've done such a good job of connecting it to the wider canon without alienating those who don't know about it. Which because obviously you've been watching a little bit of Rebels yourself, so it's interesting speaking with you about these things because of certain little connections in that way.
Yeah, and that is a huge understatement. Obviously, I've been binging the crap out of Rebels.
I don't want to speak for you.
You know? I've almost completed it. I only started last week. There's 4 series of it. So, but just because I knew there's this wider world, I had watched Clone Wars, the movie, and really didn't get on with it.
It's not great.
It's really terrible. It's very much aimed at kids.
Just skip it. Anyone who's listening, just genuinely skip it. Skip most of
you've got this whole Jabba the Hutt nephew called Stinky, and it's just terrible.
Fart jokes.
So, but Rebels is really, really good, and so I've been absolutely loving it. And I think what this series does, it somehow manages to pay homage to it's the original Star Wars, isn't it? I think it's the original trilogy more than anything else. But what I haven't been appreciating, which is what, you know, you have, and all the other guys who are into all the comics and the books and everything, is all the other nods, and the cartoons, obviously, all the other nods to this wider canon that isn't in the movies. And so I've just been impressed with how the hell have they managed to knit this all together, you know, and please so many people when, let's face it, Rise of Skywalker came out and when that hit the cinemas on the first minute, you're almost thinking this is damage limitation. You know, they just have to figure out a way to piss off the least amount of people, you know, to get out with the franchise not in a big steaming ball of flames.
Post-prequel.
And I don't think they managed that because what they ended up with was a movie by committee, you know, and just tried to listen to all the feedback from episode 8. And, I think that was a mess. And so I remember thinking at the time, Disney are going to really struggle to, you know, reinvigorate this franchise. You know, they bought this thing. I'm sure they've made the money several times over, but they're going to want to keep churning, they're going to keep wanting to turn the handle and keep making money out of it. And I'm like, I've got no idea how they're going to do that. And all I say is upstep Jon Favreau. he's done an amazing job. I mean, he's directed. He directed the first episode, didn't he? Which, like we say, you know, the Marshal, it knocked that one out of the park. But he's written all 4 of the first episodes that have come out in this series. And Dave Filoni, you mentioned, obviously, you know, highly influential with the Rebels and the Clone Wars and everything. Now, the next episode is written and directed by him. So I think, I know, we're in for a biggie next week.
Yeah, it's going to be incredible. It's one of those things. I think I've seen a lot that Dave Filoni's been either like a producer or an executive producer. What it basically is that Dave Filoni was like the second George Lucas in a way. So obviously the original six, excluding Lawrence Kasdan directing the Empire Strikes Back, and I can't remember who directed the sixth one, so I'm a terrible person for that. But George Lucas, obviously the first six were his baby, and then Disney took over, and then he had some points and stuff, and he made sure Kathleen Kennedy was involved and whatever. But as much as I do enjoy the sequel trilogy, it is a mess. Flatly, as an object, like I feel like it's objectively it is a mess. Like not necessarily even story wise, but due to the pacing, the feel. Like episode 8, I really liked, but it didn't feel the same as what episode 7 was going for. And then episode 9 just tried to undo half the stuff episode 8 did. It was like two parents like bickering over how to raise a child almost in it, and it just did not fit. Mandalorian has done the opposite of that. Mandalorian is the cool uncle who can do no wrong. It's like it's just the way Jon Favreau, as you say, has done it, connecting with the creators in the right ways is just him and Filoni, because Filoni did Clone Wars. You know, most people say the prequels are shit, but the Clone Wars series is amazing, which I agree with, bar the movie in the first series of Clone Wars. And most people who've seen Rebels, which isn't that many, say Rebels is amazing, which I agree with. Resistance, not so much, but I won't talk about that too much. But Filoni has a constant, there's been multiple interviews and stuff, and he's like really good friends with George Lucas. And he says he sometimes still calls George Lucas to ask him information about advice or law or certain little things like that. And I think that this shows that Mandalorian is a massive collaborative effort. And I think that's what Star Wars needs. I don't think it needs, as you say, you know, with episode 9, it was a committee. It wasn't 10 people who were so into Star Wars they couldn't possibly fathom how incredible it was going to be to make it. I think there were definitely individuals involved who were like that. But J.J. Abrams, not to attack the guy, but he didn't consult the story group. That is a truth that is known after the fact it's come out. The story group said, look, which is the people who connect all that canon connective tissue together, he didn't consult them as much as Rian Johnson did in episode 8. So although episode 8 has a lot of flaws in it as well, episode 9, it was just disjointed and certain things didn't add up, and they had to release the book, which to undo all this stuff. Mandalorian didn't do that. You don't have to have all this additional content to make the original things make sense. Then that's probably the first in Star Wars since the original trilogy, because I love the prequels, but there are a lot of flaws in the prequels. And I just think Mandalorian is so strong by itself, and where it's going projected, if it's even as good as it is now, or as good as Series 1, just for a couple more seasons, it's going to be amazing. My only qualm, hopefully I'm wrong about this, is a apprehension I have, which is what I don't want them to do, because there's a rumor of a Boba Fett series and there's a rumor of another spin-off series coming, and it's like, what I don't want them to do is have the Mandalorian just being the jumping off point for every test that they want to do. Yeah. Which I hope it won't. But that is my one concern I will say about the Mandalorian, apart from loving it all and being incredibly happy every Friday when it comes on. And I will say as well, I like the fact that it comes out weekly. I know some people don't. I love that because it means things like this can happen, and it means the whole Star Wars community can watch it week by week. One of the things that I missed, even though I think the last series of Game of Thrones was definitely not great, what I loved about Game of Thrones was everyone who watched it every week was like, cool, what's going to happen next week? Oh my God, let's talk about it. And everyone gets to watch it at the same time. And I feel that a lot of the time now of streaming series, especially when things are released on Netflix or whatever, they do a dump, and it's like, okay, and every single episode's out right now. And it's like, well, everyone watches it in weird different orders. I don't like binging that much, so I won't sit there and watch, you know, The Crown is out recently. I'm not going to sit there and watch like 5 episodes of The Crown on a Saturday. It's just not really my jam. But if The Crown comes out weekly, I'll watch it every week, if you know what I'm saying. So yeah. I like the fact they've done that, and I like the different episodes being different lengths, because I think it shows it's not filler. There's too many shows I've seen before. One of them would be American Horror Story, where they've got 13 episodes every season, and every episode is almost an hour long. And I watched the first 2 seasons of that, and I think it only really had enough content for probably about 9 or 10 episodes. And certain episodes, they were like, oh no, we need to fill this out. And if things are airing on TV and whatever, obviously they have to make it a specific length. But because Disney have got the freedom to make them, hey, this episode only has 30 minutes of content, so we're not going to waste time with pointless stuff in that's going to annoy people. We're going to have what we need. And that's one of the things I love about it.
Yeah, I just think that again they've just got so much right. They just seem to satisfy everyone, and including the crowd who are saying, oh, and I hear this for the Marvel crew as well, that Disney, they're just going to Disneyfy everything. They're going to make it all cutesy and whatever. And it's almost as if they say, oh yeah, you think we're going to do that? Well, I'm going to give you Baby Yoda and I'm going to make you love him.
While they're being attacked by giant, terrifying spider things.
Yeah. There is nothing cuter on TV, and I can't get enough of Baby Yoda. Same. And even though I know it's like, oh, this is all the Disney stuff that people have been going on about, I shouldn't love this, but he's just brilliant. And I think, what a great time to release it just before Christmas, because I'm sure whatever Baby Yoda stuff they can manufacture is going to fly off the shelves, providing we can get in the shops.
100%. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that it does, when people say, I'm not saying that you're saying this, but when people go, oh my God, they put the Porgs in The Last Jedi so Disney could sell toys. Oh, Baby Yoda, so they could sell toys. It's like, okay, here's something that people seemingly can't fathom. Disney are a business first. They make money, but the best way to make money is to release really good stuff, really good content that people like so much, they buy their shit, okay? Disney are like one of the biggest toy manufacturers in the entire world. Yes, of course, they're going to make Baby Yoda toys, but hundreds, millions of children and millions of adults are going to want Baby Yoda toys, including probably me. Like, it does, you can have it both ways. You can have it that you've got this big evil faceless corporation, but releasing merch, what a lot of people forget about is part of the reason Star Wars had such the success it did when the original trilogy came out is because of the merchandising of it. But George Lucas cleverly basically got a lot of his share from the profits and things through the merchandising side of things, naming every character, doing all this, doing all that. It creates lore within lore, and it means that kids can have their own imagination and get in tune with it. There's nothing worse. Like, I've had it with bands as an example, where you like more so when I was a teenager, and you go, I love this band, they're incredible. What have they got to sell? I want to support them. And then you go and they go, 2 t-shirts in the web store and they're both wank. It's like, well, you lose a little bit in a sense there. But if you've got that really cool band t-shirt, even if you're not into the band anymore, you kind of still are, and it's just I'm going off on a tangent about merchandising now, but
It's absolutely right about George Lucas, though. Like I say, you got all these background characters who, if he hadn't got that deal with all of the merchandising, he wouldn't have thought probably to name them. They were just, these weird-looking aliens in the background. Nope, suddenly they're someone important with all this backstory and everything. So, yeah, it's absolutely brilliant. Now, Mike, we've got to get into tonight's episode. So, I mean, we start off with the Baby Yoda electrician. And there's a couple of things about this. I don't know if you've seen Guardians of the Galaxy 2. There's a whole scene with, Rocket Raccoon and Groot, and he's saying, push one button and not the other one.
Yeah.
And I got huge kind of flashbacks of that. And I just think, again, we've talked about satisfying the old Star Wars crowd, giving people something new who've read all the books and everything, satisfying the crowd who say you're going to over-Disneyfy everything. What this series seems to be doing as well is homaging a lot of the other sci-fi content. And I couldn't help but think that this was not a rip-off of Guardians of the Galaxy 2, but this was another little homage.
I didn't actually think of that when I saw that, funnily enough, and I should have done, because I do love Guardians of the Galaxy 2, but now that you've said it, I can really see that. So yeah, I think I know what you mean, but that definitely connects with, obviously, I think it was what Scott said, that I think episode 1 was Tremors.
Episode 1 was definitely Tremors.
And then 2 was definitely like the eggs themselves of those.
Alien.
Exactly, yeah. And then obviously there's a lot of sci-fi running away from giant creatures and things. And then episode 3, I don't know about that one specifically.
I think you had the little squid. I mean, that was almost another alien face hugger, wasn't it? You had the squid coming out of the soup on Baby Yoda.
And there's the monster, I suppose. I mean, you could almost say Jaws in some ways, of them being out on the water, and when Mando falls into the middle of the boat, and that thing, I think I should have had it written down, but No, I don't. Just the monstery thing that was on their boat that got them. So there are definitely. That's what I love is homages, because things. I mean, it's clever. It's like tapping into your nostalgia. Just go, hey, do you remember this? Yep, here you go. It's like I like that thing. Oh yeah.
And I don't know if you noticed, but I mean, Baby Yoda. We'd met Bo-Katan. And I guess you've got this whole thing where, the Mandalorian now, he realizes he's maybe one of these sort of, not separatists, that's probably not the right word, but, not all Mandalorians keep the helmet on all the time. And I noticed when, after the whole little electrician thing going wrong, Baby Yoda was trying to look under his helmet as he was just having a sip of his soup there. I mean, what can you tell us about from the kind of other lore about the Mandalorians taking their helmets off or keeping them on?
To be honest, in canon, there is not anything about Mandalorians keeping their helmets on. So for all of us canon lore junkies, to my knowledge, there wasn't anything huge about it, because the Mandalorian plot lines primarily are in the Clone Wars, and that's how sort of Maul gets involved in some ways as well, how he gets kind of back in the story. And then in Rebels, it comes back again. And I won't see what that happens, because obviously you're still watching it. I try not to spoil the series and things. But really what it was that Mandalore has had civil wars and wars with everyone for ages. They're like in air quotes, a race of warrior people. You can be born on Mandalore and you become Mandalorian, or you can take the Mandalorian creed. But before the Mandalorian series, in canon, there wasn't necessarily mention of the Mandalorian creed. We only knew it as a race. So this aspect of the Mandalorians not taking their helmets off and things, that is something that is new to the canon, at least. I mean, so it's weird, because it was basically just in Clone Wars. It gives you history and stuff about the Mandalorian had wars of Jedi, and there's like thousands of years ago there was the Mandalorian wars against the Jedi and the Republic, and then that happened, and then eventually Mandalore kind of repaired itself after I think they lost. I'm not 100% sure. I'm pretty sure they did. And then they kind of sorted themselves out, and then they had a big civil war. And then every time they keep getting to the point of, okay, maybe we can sort of be self-sufficient and kind of deal with ourselves and things like that, they have another civil war. And that happens again in Clone Wars. And then there's a lot of, in Rebels, without spoiling it, the Empire is involved, and a lot of Mandalorians are trying to resist the Empire. So that becomes a whole thing. And then where Rebels ends, you don't know what happens between then and the Mandalorian. And Rebels to Mandalorian is about 10 years. It's nine-ish years, but yeah, just say 10 freeze. So it's like in that period of time, we don't know what happened to Mandalore or any of the sort of planets connected to Mandalore. And yeah, the not taking a helmet off part. The only thing I can say is Bo-Katan calling herself part of the Watch now. She was in a group called Death Watch, which was a terrorist organization in the Clone Wars. So they were trying to, there's basically, once again, a civil war sort of thing going on. They were basically a terrorist group because the leader of Mandalore at the time was trying to be pacifist, and they were like, Mandalorians have always been warrior race. We should never be pacifist. We should go out and, people who don't listen to us, we should fight them essentially. But that's where she kind of came from. But in the show, there was not, to my knowledge, basically every major Mandalorian character took their helmets off. But I don't know if that was more just for people watching to kind of be able to know who they are in a sense. But yeah, to my knowledge, this is from the Mandalorian Series 1 and Series 2. It is the first time we've seen that. And I think that once you've watched the end of Rebels, it alludes to something happening, which would potentially explain the splinter groups of the sort of Mandalorian. I think they're sects or something.
Well, it's funny you mentioned the Watch, and we talked about Game of Thrones before as well. So what I'm picking up from Rebels is that, the Mandalorians aren't this one unified, polarized planet or race of people. It does seem that you've got all these different houses, and you've got all these different people, and there's all the politics between all of them. So, I guess we'll find out, why he doesn't take his helmet off. But he didn't seem to really have a clue that he was part of this kind of cult, who wasn't quite with all the rest of the Mandalorians. But
no, but it is weird that he was, from what I think, I can't remember if this is a specific confirmed or if this is more alluded to, but in series 1 when it does the flashbacks and there's the separatist droids from the prequels, they start shooting up where he's living in, and he hides, and he gets saved by a Mandalorian. That Mandalorian, I'm 99% sure on this, is a part of, or was a part of, Death Watch specifically, which is quite interesting. So it was a part of the air quotes terrorist organization that Bo-Katan was a part of, but obviously there is people who've seen the Clone Wars will know even parts of that own Death Watch splinter off within themselves. So I think it's just inherent, as you say, just Mandalorians are inherently proud and warrior race, and whenever anyone is inherently proud, it comes a pride, and that ends up being people thinking they've got the right answer, which makes the whole "this is the way" thing quite ironic in a way.
All I can think is that they probably had a word with the PR guys, and said, "Look, Death Watch, it's not really promoting the right image for us." I always think back to the old kind of X-Men comics. You had the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, and for the movies they changed it to the Brotherhood, and I'm like, yeah, that's a better move. That if you're calling yourself the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, you're sort of telling everyone who you are straight off the bat. So yeah, Death Watch, not a great move there. But I mean, we get to I don't know what they're called. Maybe you can help me out on this. That there was these kind of little Star Wars cantina type monsters, little aliens. What are they called?
So are they the ones that Cara Dune, she basically beats up when they're at this? Yeah. So they're in, I don't know if you realise, I think you would have done, but they're in the place that the Armourer was in Series 1.
Right, okay.
So the last time you saw that was at the end of Series 1, and you've got the Armourer there after she talks to Mando and stuff, and then some stormtroopers go in there, and then she fucks them all up, basically. That it was where it seemed to be, from what I could tell. And basically, those beings are called Aqualish. I'm glad you asked me, because I did write this down. Nice. They're called Aqualish, and the reason that most people would recognize them is because, in the cantina in A New Hope, you've got Dr. Cornelius Evazan and Ponda Baba. Ponda Baba is the Aqualish, who go up to Luke. And Dr. Cornelius Evazan is the one who goes, "I don't like you." And Luke's like, "Okay." And then he goes, and he taps him again. He goes, "He doesn't like you either." It's like, "Sorry." And then that thing. Well, his associate is Ponda Baba, and Ponda Baba is an Aqualish as well. They're fairly common in the Star Wars universe and things. But yeah, that's why most people would recognize him, is the associate of Cornelius Evazan, who's "I'm wanted in," got the death sentence on God knows how many
7 systems.
There you go. I can't remember how many it was. He's in the Dr. Aphra comics.
I think it was 7.
I think it is.
I'm impressed that you remember all the names and stuff. I've seen that scene so many times, Mike, and it's "You'll be dead." I absolutely love it. But I couldn't have told you what the aliens were, or certainly not what the names were. So brilliant pull there, Mike.
Thank you. The reason I remember his name specifically is because he's in a major arc of the Dr. Aphra comics, in the first run of Dr. Aphra comics. So at some point I will be tackling it on the standard show, because I have just started. I've had the next episode of Star Wars Comics in Canon, the standard ones, is going to be the Screaming Citadel crossover event between the main run of Star Wars and Dr. Aphra. So if people subscribe to Comics in Motion and may pay attention on Saturdays to Star Wars Comics in Canon, in a few months' time, I'll be going into the specific arc, which actually gives some backstory into Dr. Cornelius Evazan. Got some tongue twister almost to say. And he goes on. I think at that point as well, he's actually wanted in more star systems as well. So he keeps going on saying, "I'm wanted in blah, blah, blah star systems." It's quite a funny little running joke there.
That's brilliant. But after she takes some names there, we get the Mandalorian, and he basically limps, to meet up with Grief Karga and Cara Dune as well. And they kind of let him know that there's this old Imperial base that's still there on the planet, so they kind of want to get rid of it and just rid the planet so they can become this kind of trade center in that sector. Now, I have to tell you, Mike, I was thinking when he opened up the school, because it's clear that, Mando, he thinks, it's clearly a thriving place now, isn't it? From when we saw it in Series 1. But when he goes to the school and you see the teacher there, my first thought was, that's 000, that. Did you not think?
With the colours, I
just thought
did.
The colouring and everything.
Yes.
I mean, clearly, it had a female voice and sounded very pleasant, very teacherly. But the look of it, I thought, oh, Christ, if that's 000, this is going to be a bloodbath.
I did for a second. I was like, wait. I did have that moment. I was like, surely not. And then they spoke. And then I think also 000's got the red eyes. And I think when you first see them, you can't see it clearly, but then it zooms in a bit. And then you say it's a female voice and white eyes, and I was like, probably not. It would be amazing if it was, but I think 000 is still going on in the Afro comics. They've just started their second run, so no one really knows. He could show up. That would be imagine Series 3 or Series 4 just having the homicide, because so many people don't have any idea who 000 is, and it's just this protocol droid with a 000 matrix. So it's basically C-3PO, but with the personality matrix of a homicidal killer who does nothing more than draining organics of their blood. And I just think if you brought that into Series 3 or 4 of Mandalorian, just one little episode, it would be incredible. It would be so cool.
It's basically like C-3PO if C-3PO was taken from the mind of Ted Bundy.
Yes, that's a very good way of putting it.
But yeah, so I thought it was going to be him, but clearly not. For another day, that one. But I mean, what do you reckon? You've got a whole little abuse, I think I would say, of the Force, stealing some cookies.
Yeah, they looked a lot like macarons, didn't they? That was quite, that was amazing. I mean, it is also, it's one of those things where whenever a Baby Yoda cute part is happening, a lot of the time you can see it happening. Like it's kind of semi-obvious, but it's not any less cute. It's like, you look at it, you go, I know what he's going to do. Go on, you little chap. Go on. And it's just like, all your hope is like, Megan, when she was watching, she was like, God, I hope that kid doesn't hit him or something. And I was like, yeah, I mean.
I thought the same. I thought he was going to give him a space wedgie or something.
Oh, man, that would have been.
I mean, the size differential was huge, wasn't it, between this kid and Baby Yoda? I mean, fair play. He's got the Force.
I was worried that he was going to, the kid was maybe going to smack Yoda or Baby Yoda or something. I mean, and just to anyone who's listening, I know he's not called Baby Yoda, he's called the child, but calling him Baby Yoda is much more fun and easy to say.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say that from now on, any people who are waggling their fingers. But I did think this, he was going to smack Baby Yoda, and then Baby Yoda was going to force choke him, and I was like, no, don't force choke. I was already preempting, don't force choke him in the kids' school, please. But they fortunately kind of went around that, and I'm very thankful they did, because I don't know how to felt about that. It upset me too much.
Yeah, I think they're really trying to push the child this series, actually, aren't they? I think because Baby Yoda's escaped into the pop culture.
Yeah,
I think they're trying to push the child, but for me, it just doesn't have that same ring. So I agree. Until they actually, give it a proper name or name the species, then it's Baby Yoda for me.
Yeah, I mean, it is going to be one of those things where there's rumors they may never. I think they will. I think it's because in Legends, George Lucas specifically never allowed anyone to name Yoda species, which is interesting. So no one knows, but there's also people going, oh my God, there might be a Yoda movie. It's like, no, don't need a Yoda movie. We've got 6 movies. The main ones are 5 of them have got Yoda in. He's in loads of episodes of Clone Wars. He's got his own mini movie in basically the Clone Wars, which is one of the last arcs of Series 6. Go watch that if you want a Yoda movie. And he's going to be in the bloody High Republic as well. So I like Yoda. Don't need a Yoda movie, okay? Let's have some original movies that don't focus on all the same characters and stuff. But yeah, I do know what you mean with it, where it's like, it's one of those things like, I don't want to be that guy, but when people go, oh yeah, I love Baby Yoda, because anyone who knows me in any amount tells me they love Star Wars, and I have to kind of rein in sometimes depending on who I'm talking to. I was talking to someone about probably 6 months ago now or something, and they're like, oh, did you watch The Mandalorian? I was like, yeah, I did, and this was when Series 1 was out. And like, yeah, I loved it. Yeah, I love that Sith Lord at the end. And I was like, I'm not even going to tell you he's not one. I was like, I'm going to let you have that. I'm not going to be like, Will, Actually, sir, that's Moff Gideon. What he's holding there is the Darksaber. What could he do? It's like, I'm not. People may not think that outside the podcast, I may talk like that to people. I do often rein in quite a lot. And Baby Yoda is one of those things. It's like, people say Baby Yoda. I'm not going to be a dick and correct them about it.
You go through the same thing as like a comic book nerd. Less so now because you got so many movies and everything. But you used to have to kind of like almost jockey for position. It's like, oh yeah, I love Superman or something like that, or I love Batman. It's like, really? How much? I mean, are we talking, 1966 Adam West Batman, or are we talking 89 Batman, or are we talking actual Batman from the comics, Yeah.
And then which comic iteration do you specifically like? Do you like it when, when Robin then became Batman when he had a year off? Did you like this version of Batman, or was it the Crisis Earth bit? All these different things. I'm just throwing out buzzwords because I'm one of the scrubs who barely knows anything about comic Batman either. So there you go. I'm one of those.
But you don't claim to like him. I mean, I'm talking about, in those kind of social situations where you're meeting someone new, and like you say, you initially, I think, rein it in a little bit, just try not to pick up on every little nitpick.
Don't want to seem like a dick to everyone who's like the Star Wars snob.
Pretty
like
much,
if there's anything less cool than being the Star Wars guy, it's that Star Wars guy who, if you talk to him about Star Wars, he's a complete dick about it. It's like, no one needs that.
And he's got his own podcast.
God, that makes me sound like such an internet troll, doesn't it? No, you're wrong here, sir, but I will not even discuss this with you. Go listen to my podcast, you'll find out, you knave.
I mean, we've all become the comic book guy from The Simpsons, haven't we? Well, no, actually.
Oh, my Lord.
But anyway, getting back to the episode. So, one of the names who, quite honestly, I only knew through looking up on IMDb, the little blue guy from Series 1, Episode 1, Mythrol, apparently.
I had to look him up as well.
Yeah, I didn't I didn't really like his design. I didn't like his makeup and stuff. To me, he didn't really feel Star Wars. He looked like a Star Trek alien to me. For me, Star Trek, they put on the makeup and everything. They make him look a bit weird, but he still speaks with an American accent, and that's kind of the Star Trek DNA. Whereas, Star Wars, the aliens always look quite, very, very different to humans, typically. So, for me, I didn't really like him. I was not expecting him to appear again.
No. When he popped up, I was like, it was one of those surprises. It was like, oh, okay. And then it kind of explained why. And I was like, that makes a lot of sense, actually. That kind of, that does work. And he is a bit of I liked him being in it because the whole time me and Megan were like, when's he going to run away? When's he going to betray them? Because he's got that sort of, he's a bit shady. And it's quite good having a character like that because, I think Grief Karga by now, everyone kind of trusts him. And I hope he doesn't then betray everyone. But I think he's now, because in the first series, obviously it was that kind of back and forth of Mando, but he's now come out the good side. And Cara Cynthia June, she was always that, she's a bit of a rogue, but she, as in, the drinker, the one who doesn't want to confront their past, but she is a good person. But he was like, I don't know, and he's kind of a coward, and it's kind of good to have a coward among the badasses in a way. But his voice was, I do agree with you, maybe not jarring, but it does. For a few moments, it kind of takes you out of it because, as you say, you think when you've got people like in just episode 3, I think it was, you've got the frog people who don't speak any English at all. You've got the Quarren who've got the tentacle coming out of their mouth and they're talking like this. And then you've got the Mon Calamari who obviously Admiral Akbar's the famous one and they all talk on a specific, they've got their own things. But he just sounded like, I looked him up and I couldn't remember who the actor was, but I was like, I swear I know him. And I looked it up and I didn't really know the actor. And I was like, oh, no, he just sounds like every slightly douchey side character in a comedy film.
You know who he is?
Who?
And I know he's not, but for me, this is Rob Schneider. That is basically his role. In something like The Gigolo,
I was going to say Deuce Bigalow.
Judge Dredd, or Deuce Bigalow, not the Gigolo. Yeah, Judge Dredd when he was opposite Sly Stallone. He's got that kind of those occasional little lines. Of course, when he sees Mando initially, he kind of lets release a kind of throat fart or something, doesn't he?
Well, that's a throwback, I think, because once again, I don't know this amount of information about this character because I had to look him up as well because I was like, I don't recognize that species. I'll see if he's connected to anything else. But from what I can tell, it was created for at least the canon for this. But what they did actually is in episode, I think it's episode 8 or 9. There was in the background, there was a character who basically had almost the exact same makeup. And so they've now canonized them both being the same species. But in series 1 of Mando, he says something like, he's going to go to when he goes to the toilet or whatever, or he mentions, he says, you don't want to be around a mithril when they shoot out their thorax. It was some sort of line like that. And I think that's what that was meant to be.
Yeah, I'd forgotten about that. You're right. But now you've said it, I do actually remember that line. But yeah, I do think he has some, funny little lines, but he is very Rob Schneider.
Yes.
What I did like, though, is, again, I just think the writers have got it correct, that one of the things that I love about this Star Wars is it just looks so... like that original trilogy, like all the instrument dials and everything, it looks like that original 77 design. And but the thing is, it is not the safest place to be, is it, the Star Wars universe?
No.
You've got these tiny little thin walkways where, 1 foot wrong and you are careering off to your death. And he actually says when they're trying to get him to walk around and ramp up the generator to make it overload, he's like, yeah, there's no guardrail on this. And I'm like, yes, the Empire did not have guardrails. They must have lost so many Imperial guards and stormtroopers to just like putting that foot wrong and just careering off into a pit of lava.
Well, it's like, I think it makes me think of I haven't seen the Robot Chicken Star Wars, unfortunately, and I need to, but I've seen the Family Guy Star Wars episodes, and in Blue Harvest, which is the one of the New Hope. And fun fact, it's called Blue Harvest, Family Guy Blue Harvest, because in production, Star Wars' code name was Blue Harvest. So people didn't know what it was. There you go. So with that, there's in that bit, the Death Star shoots and stuff, and it's got the two, because you see like a scene for like a second or so, a shot in A New Hope of the two people standing at the control panel when the giant laser shoots past them and they haven't got a guardrail. And it just makes me think of in Blue Harvest when he goes, oh God, there's no guardrail here. And it's like, it's so funny to see that, them kind of, I think the Mandalorian, what they do cleverly is I think me and Scott, or more so Scott, spoke about this when we did the big Mandalorian collaboration last year. And it was, Star Wars, especially the original trilogy, do humor really, really well. Not just, oh, that is funny, someone trips on a banana peel, falls in the red, that's slapsticky. But it's the quips, it's the clever little subtle things that it's not laugh out loud funny all the time, but it makes you chuckle. And I think he did that quite well in exactly the part that you say, where sometimes you look at that and go, what? And everyone in the universe is almost like, you almost need that kind of everyman, don't you? In a lot of shows, like with The Boys, it started off with Huey and things. You've got all these people who know what they're doing, and then when some crazy shit happens, they go, "What's that? What's happening?" And it's like, "Why is this crazy weird thing?" And everyone else is like, "Oh, that's just normal, mate. What's going on?" It's like he brought that, I think, and I think he did bring that quite well. And as I said, I do like him being a coward, because as much as I love Mandalorian being badass, and I like him as a character, and he is growing. He does need this ensemble cast, doesn't he? Because he is two-dimensional in a sense. He's slowly becoming 3D, and he's a badass, but he's like John Wick in a way. Like, he's just really, really, really cool, and there's not a huge amount else to him as of yet, and he needs these other characters to kind of balance him out and stuff. And I think the Mithril did it very well.
I don't know if you've ever seen the old kind of Clint Eastwood westerns,
spaghetti westerns. I've seen The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly a while ago in bits and pieces, but I know bits and pieces about it.
I think it was Chris who said, he's Mandalorian. Even the way he talks is a little bit Clint Eastwood, and he's like that. He's just too cool, isn't he? He's got everything under control at all times. So I agree. I like this little kind of ensemble cast that they're building up there. I have to say, my favorite bit from that Blue Harvest Family Guy thing is when R2-D2 and C-3PO escape, the Death Destroyer and Star Destroyer, sorry, and get along to Tatooine, and then they say, "Oh, let's shoot that," and then some other guy's like, "No, it's fine. It's just gone off by mistake," and then it's like, "What, are we paying by the laser now?"
I love that bit as well. And I'll tell you what, I think genuinely there's the book A Certain Point of View, which is the 40 short stories from different characters in A New Hope and things. It's not the most consistent book, and there's a slog in the middle of the cantina that goes on forever, but there is a bit about that character, I think, who specifically didn't shoot that laser.
Right, okay.
This is what I mean about Star Wars. Half the time when Star Wars gets released, I think it's people who write some of the stories just hear criticisms from other places and then use that to cover up a plot hole, because obviously Rogue One of the coolest Star Wars films, that is literally made because they were like, how is it that this amazing Super Star Destroyer, this gigantic Death Star thing, massive space station, got blown up by a couple of things? That seems like an oversight for someone who's tactful as the Empire, and things. And you go, oh, we have to have a whole film to explain it. But I do think
that's because Mads Mikkelsen put it in there.
Exactly, yeah. Good old Galen Erso. And it is one of those things where Star Wars has, especially the old ones, do have plot holes. I think what they're doing with a lot of content now, including A Certain Point of View books, because they just released one for Empire Strikes Back, is they subtly try and cover up and give explanations to these little things. I think it was something like the Empire have got so many pointless and unnecessary orders and rules and regulations that if you fire at an escape pod with no organisms in it, then you have to write a report about it. It's something really monotonous like that. And he was like, I can't be asked for the report. And it's like, did you really need to add that in? Was that really...
It's like Solo, isn't it? I mean, that's just to explain why you can do the Kessel Run in, what was it, 12 parsecs or whatever it is?
Exactly. Because George Lucas got parsec, he thought it was time when it's actually unit of distance. And then
it's a unit of distance, yeah. But speaking of things that... I think this series might knit together things from the movies as well. So you know how we've said, and we poke fun a little bit at times, that because you've read all the comics, there's all of these plot holes that are covered that aren't explained in the actual movies, but they're covered, somewhere else.
It makes you sound like
the Mandalorians trying to do that. So what do you reckon about it when they take over the Imperial base? So they overload the reactor, and then they discover it's not actually like just a military base, it's a lab. And they sort of see, I couldn't really make out what this figure was, but it looked like it wasn't alive. It was kind of jellified or what have you. And then they get the little recording as well, don't they? And I don't know if you picked up on this, but they mentioned the M count.
Yes, I did.
You did. And I thought, see, brilliant. Again, they know if they say Metachlorians, it's going to piss off so many people. So we're just going to make a little tweak. We're going to, we'll just call it the M count. And then people who are really listening will know what we're talking about. But probably those people are not the same people who will be triggered by Metachlorians.
Yeah, I mean, I did get that. And I will just say as well as one thing, I don't think anyone who listens to the show is especially toxic. I make little jokes about people waggling their fingers, but all the community who listen to the show, I've had nothing but lovely messages and things. So thanks, guys. But there are a lot of people who, I had one interaction with someone on Instagram who was quite argumentative about things.
I remember that one.
Yeah, that was a fun day. Scathing over that. People like to basically shit on the Disney sequel trilogy a lot, and I'm going to be in Comics on Trial coming out in a couple of weeks' time. But that's not the only reason I said that. People go on, George Lucas, he would have made such a better sequel trilogy, rah, rah, rah. And it's like, I do not think that is true. I really like the prequels. I do not think George Lucas would make a better sequel trilogy. But one big thing that George Lucas has explicitly said a lot of times is that he was going to go into more detail about the science and the midichlorians. But a big part of his plot for the sequel trilogy was going to be going even further into the midichlorian stuff. So I just want to flag that up just to say, hey guys, hold back the gunfire of that sort of hating the sequel trilogy because George Lucas made a better one, because that was one of the big problems with the prequels. But as you say, I love the fact that they're having enough connections to the prequels, as you say, like stitch it together. They're having enough connections, and they're being very clever with their language, and they're being very specific to not say anything. Like, I'd love someone to say that they love sand or something. That would just do me. That would crack me up. There is a comic where Luke, actually, I think I took a photo of it on Twitter or something ages ago. There is a comic where Luke, he goes on this adventure of some sort in the comics, and he comes to this planet and there's sand. And actually, I think it's the new run of Star Wars comics by Charles Soule. And he goes, "Oh man, I love sand, so reliable," or something like that. Just this little throwaway line about Luke loving sand. And I just want to throw that in there because that made me giggle. But
you know what? Just a side thing. I've just had a flashback then, and I don't think it was from this episode. I think I'm getting a bit Rebels blind because I've watched so many in the last week. But I actually think Zeb, who's like one of the crew, I think at some point he said wizard.
I think he might do.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure, because it's one of those where my ears just pricked up and I'm like, oh, there's no real reason for you to put that in other than for it to be a little nod to say, okay, well, it is a bit of a sort of throwaway slang term, that it's not just a young Anakin Skywalker used.
Also, just say we've got messages from Scott as well, so we've got questions at the end. He sent us 2.
That's cool. So well, let's just ask you then. So, what do you think these experiments might be? What do you think that's potentially going to lead to?
Well, that's really good because both of Scott's questions are specifically about them.
Awesome. Seamless
together. Yeah, exactly. You did that magically with your brain, with the Force. You've got a high M count. I'll start with basically because there's 2 aspects. There's right at the end you see the clone troopers, and then but before that you see the things in the sort of tanks and stuff. So I'll say the tanks on first, and then we'll kind of plod to the end. So Scott asked, "Do we think that the cloning pods are linked to Snoke?" And I do not believe so. I'm not disputing because cloning technology. Basically, what it seems like they're trying to do is they're trying to create some sort of controllable Force-sensitive being. That's obviously what they're vaguely trying to do. But this is obviously post Return of the Jedi. So this is... the question is basically, do people think that Moff Gideon and his Imperial remnant are connected to what Palpatine gets up to in The Rise of Skywalker? I hope not, and I don't think so, because... essentially what it seems to be is Gideon's Imperial Remnant is his own thing. And the guy, Dr. I wrote his name down because I didn't get it the first time, Dr. Pershing, which is the guy with the glasses who was in Series 1 and then his face pick.
With the M count.
Exactly, yep. Yeah. I'm pretty certain that people spotted a badge of some sort on his arm or whatever, which was some logo to do with the Kaminoan cloners from the prequels who made the Clone Army. So what it seems to be is they're trying to create clones that are Force sensitive, and in all those jars, I think were failed attempts at them. But when I was watching it and I saw those things in those tanks and whatever, I was trying to get a better look at it, like you were as well, where you kind of try and focus in and go, what the hell are those things? And I think they intentionally kind of leave them. So I don't know what specifically they are. I think it is just going to be, trying to get Force-sensitive soldiers in a sense. And I can delve slightly more into that in a second. But is there anything else you want to ask me prior to that?
Well, so, I mean, I think I'm with Scott. And that's a little bit of a leading question. I think this might have some kind of connection to Snoke. Because let's face it, right? What was the fucking point of him in that sequel trilogy? I need closure. I need to know that there was some kind of point in that. And, from a couple of weeks ago, you'd mentioned that clones, they age a lot quicker because you want to grow up this army or whatever it is you're trying to do. So you need them to grow up a lot faster. I think this is about 20 or so years before Force Awakens, isn't it?
Yes, yeah.
So, I mean... when we see Snoke, he's obviously had a hard life if he's only 20, but, when I saw it, and, I was thinking cloning technology as well, and I think, have they actually confirmed that Snoke was like a failed Emperor clone or something like that?
Kind of not. They've not given explicit information. Really, this is one of the points I'm going to make in Comics on Trial when I argue with Tony. So fingers crossed he hasn't caught up to Mandalorian yet, because I'm throwing one of my points. But essentially, one of the things that pissed me off about Rise of Skywalker was the fact they just kind of give all these major plot points and just kind of brush them aside and don't really talk about them, and then you have to read the fucking book to make any sense. Palpatine was making... From what we can tell, because it's a bit vague in the book, and I haven't read the book either, so sorry guys. So it's a lot of secondary information and me reading other information. But basically, Palpatine was making clone bodies of himself. I'm not sure for how long he was doing that before Episode 6, but he was trying to make clones of himself. I believe the largest theory is that, yes, he managed to get his energy, body, consciousness, whatever. He got his consciousness into the basically fucked up one you see in Rise of Skywalker, the basically decaying and stuff. And he was trying to make one that would sustain his life force better. Snoke, I'm pretty sure, is basically, like a failed Palpatine clone, but it didn't have... It wasn't like a body that Palpatine could like transfer his essence into. It had its own consciousness, and that's kind of what made Snoke. And from what I can tell of the very little bits of information we have, Snoke was not aware of Palpatine. So he was... This is what I mean. It's so fucking vague. That's why episode 9 annoys me a lot. Is that it's kind of like we generally, in layman's terms, too long didn't read, is yes, Snoke was basically a failed Palpatine clone that had his own consciousness and dark side abilities, and therefore that is what it was. I don't know. This is the part where it gets a bit hazy, because in the Aftermath books, which is where Cobb Vanth originated from, might I add, the Aftermath books, it's a big story, it's amazing, and I love it, but what it basically ends with parts of the Empire fleeing off into the unknown regions of space, not to be heard of again. And people thought they just retreated and disappeared and died for some reason. But they went off with this new training program, which becomes the First Order training program, and little bits of other information I'm not going to go into. But what the general idea is, that what people think is that a fair clump of what was remaining of the Empire disappeared and hid into the unknown regions, potentially to Exegol or whatever, and kind of liaise with Palpatine. And then the weirdness comes from, did that same part that created the First Order, did they already know... Did the First Order we see directly commune with Palpatine, and that became the First Order intentionally? Or was it Snoke and no one knew about Palpatine? Or did everyone know about Palpatine and Snoke, but Snoke didn't know? This is where it gets really complicated and messy. So I've given you almost no answer here. So it could be, for what we know. However, my opinion is that Moff Gideon is the boss of his Imperial Remnant. I don't think that he is trying to get back with Palpatine, or he's trying necessarily to help revive Palpatine or anything like that. I think he's basically just still trying to keep the Empire going. All the leaders of the Empire have basically pissed off to the unknown regions, and they're just kind of left scrambling. And I think he's one of the people who stood up to the plate and is now trying to recreate his own empire, probably thinking, well, the Emperor... I don't know how much the general Empire knew about the Palpatine being Force sensitive, but everyone knew that Vader was scary and had a lightsaber, so people assume he's Force sensitive, and obviously choked a lot of people. So he probably, from what I gather, is Gideon is kind of trying to make maybe a new Vader or a new legion of similar-ish to Vaders to help him enforce the will of the Empire in case they come across other Force sensitives. That's my general theory on that matter specifically.
Well, it sounds plausible. I think
it's too vague to be able to clarify. So, but my theory is a theory. This isn't Mike the Star Wars guy telling you for fact. It is definitely not that way. I want to clarify. The Snoke stuff is quite vague. So
yeah. So I think you got one. Yes, we think it might be about Snoke, and one. No, it's probably not.
Maybe. Yeah, who knows?
What's the second bit?
The question the second part of what Scott asked was basically just, are they trying to make Force troopers? Has this been done before in stories? I had to look this up because this is to do with Legends material, so I am not as adverse with Legends. But I think they're called Dark Troopers, essentially. Not to be confused with Death Troopers. So Death Troopers are the ones that you see in Rogue One that are all black and have the things that make their voices all sound weird. Dark Troopers were essentially dark side stormtroopers. In Legends, from what I can recall, because I did make a few notes on this, it is some iterations where they were kind of droid and mechanic and also had some imbuement of the dark side, and others were like experimentations who were force sensitive dark side using troopers. But they, in Legends, they were in a few bits and pieces, but I to my knowledge, there's no huge, massive storyline about force sensitive, specifically stormtroopers. In the canon, there's almost nothing. There's like, in the Jedi Fallen Order game, there's like Purge Troopers, and then in Star Wars Rebels, there's the Inquisitors. But there's not dark side stormtroopers in the canon specifically. And that's what, at the end, when you saw that kind of shot of black stormtrooper armor being connected up to things. And the reason people think it's Dark Troopers specifically is because in the audio descriptive thing that you can do for Disney Plus, the audio description says it's a room with Dark Troopers in. But to clarify, people may say either it's describing how their armor looks, which is dark colored stormtroopers, or is it Disney subtly, for some reason, in audio descriptive, giving hints about dark troopers? So maybe it's probably going to be, as I kind of said, probably Moff Gideon's trying to create some sort of force sensitive stormtroopers in some way, probably similar to how he perceived Darth Vader. The cloning technology is probably part and parcel with that. I wouldn't be surprised if they're trying to, in some way, either trying to inject people with the blood of a force sensitive to make them force sensitive, which I don't think works, to my knowledge, in canon, and then, or they're just trying to create completely new clones who are Darksiders, who are going to be stormtroopers. But I hope they do. Like, not to be mean, but I hope they succeed, because that would be a really, really cool thing to have in the canon.
And I think the thing I found fascinating about it is the fact that they were all in their own little pods. So you'd think we haven't seen stormtroopers, say, unless they're in transport carrier or something like that. We haven't seen stormtroopers like that. No. These are almost like the Borg from Star Trek. It's what makes me wonder, are they actually, rather than being clones, are they actually some kind of droids? That wouldn't connect at all to the whole experiments on, force sensitive people or what have you. But, just the way they were there completely still, it looked great. As a closing shot, you're like, oh, it's all hotting up now, because a lot of this episode, it was connecting a lot of the dots from previous, right back to season 1, episode 1.
Yes.
And I think, obviously, Moff Gideon, he's the big bad, isn't he? He's like the Thanos. He's always there in the background. He's almost dressed up like Darth Vader, isn't he?
Yeah, exactly.
And so, I wasn't sure if this was a clear nod to something else that had come before, or it sounds like this could be something new. Yeah,
I think it's going to be something. I mean, as I said, in Legends, to my knowledge, they weren't tackled a huge amount anyway, so even in all of it that they're doing, but there are quite a few little nods to Legend stuff. As I say, I don't generally tackle much Legend stuff in the show because it gets too confusing when things become canon, but the Crate Dragon, that is a hugely massive thing in Legends. In the Knights of the Old Republic games, I'm pretty certain it's like one of the big main quests. So when you beat the Crate Dragon, you get the pearl, which is what the Tusken Raiders picked up and were all happy about. It's like, so they are, Jon Favreau, once again, he's connecting to Legend stuff. And that's, as we said right near the start, they're trying to appease so many people. But there's the new Star Wars fans, there's the sequel haters, there's the prequel haters, there's the prequel lovers, the sequel lovers, the people who think that Legends is the only way to go. And so that you can't, anything that changes anything about the Legends material is completely wrong. You've got people who only seen the films, you've got people who've barely seen the films. There's so many different Star Wars fans. Whereas, when you go to like Marvel, for example, Cinematic Universe, it's basically almost 3 camps, isn't it? It's movies only, vague peripheral knowledge of other stuff, like a few series and a few games, and then massively into the comics. So you can really appease all 3 of them at once in a lot of ways. But with Star Wars, it is such a mess. But yeah, I'm very, very excited. I thought this episode, I think, I don't know if it was my favorite or not. It's kind of hard. It's hard to choose a favorite. I think personally the first one might still be my favorite, but
yeah,
I just love Timothy Oliphant and anything. So him being combat just made my day. And humanizing the Tusken Raiders a bit, and the Crate Dragon was really cool. And it was just like, I don't know. I've loved every episode so far. I would probably say episode 2 might be the weakest, but I do not think it's weak by any stretch. It's just, it's got the least amount of plot in a sense. It is kind of a filler episode. But I loved episode 4. I love where they're going. I want them to keep pushing the button and trying out new things, and kind of, I don't want them to necessarily worry about appeasing everyone, but they're doing such a good job of it. I'm just very hopeful. My only other thing I'll say is that I love The Mandalorian, but I hope there's only like 4 or 5 seasons, only on, like, if not maybe only 3. I'd rather it's like 4 or 5. But what I don't want to happen is for the Mandalorian to be searching for Baby Yoda's family for like years and years and years and years and years. Like, I don't want them to, as much as I love The Mandalorian, I don't want them to, I hate the term, but like drag it out, if you know what I mean. But from what I can tell, I don't think they're going to do that.
No, and I hope what they don't do as well. There seems to be all this noise and clambering for everyone, all of these characters to have their own spin-off shows. It's like, well, let's just enjoy them in this one spin-off show. I think, to me, what this series is proving is the fact that you can do a lot, with a live-action property in the Star Wars universe that's got nothing to do with the Skywalkers, or, there's nods back to the Skywalker saga, but, it's a separate story in this rich universe. I think that's what it's proving. And you mentioned about the comics as well, and I think, because I guess this happens a lot more in comics, I think we're a bit more desensitized to reboots. So because things get so complicated, and, you've got these different writers, and there's not necessarily an architect, taking care of all the continuity and what have you. DC have done it more just because they've been around for longer, but in the 80s, you had the whole Crisis on Infinite Earths, where they basically had to consolidate everything, simplify everything, because writers were tying themselves up in knots, trying to keep things consistent with all these, disparate kind of stories and what have you, and conflicting stories. So to me, to just say, okay, Legends, bit too complicated, it's not consistent at all, we're going to absolutely say this is the canon. But since doing that, honestly, I don't know if I'm in the minority or not, but it feels to me, apart from the movies, that Disney have actually done a pretty good job.
Yeah, I agree with you. As someone who is, especially since doing the podcast, especially, I've been much more of a canon junkie, and that the amount of inconsistencies are so slim, and so they're not anything like storyline breaking or anything. Like, there's one which is like in the Clone Wars, there's a confrontation between Ahsoka and Maul, and in that her lightsabers are blue. But there's a book which came out before all that, which has a flashback to that scene essentially, and her lightsabers are mentioned to be green in that, because there's a reason she changed them to be blue in the Clone Wars. And when this book came out, it was before they thought that the new Clone Wars would get made, so they were using old Clone Wars scripts to make new content to kind of fill in the gaps that people would lost out on. It's things like that. We're like, really, if you're going to get up in arms about Ahsoka's lightsabers being slightly different colors, like, just have your own headcanon. Like, if you want them to be green when she fought Maul, okay, have them green. If you want them to be blue, have them blue. It doesn't break the whole Star Wars universe, the hue of a lightsaber. And it's, as you say, like, I think they've done a genuinely smashing job. I think that, and there's new projects on the horizon that I'm going to be speaking about more so in the new year, with the High Republic, which is set 200 years before Phantom Menace. And when these have all been out for a little while, I imagine there's going to be movies or series that are going to kind of delve into the High Republic. But what I'm very excited about is, as you say, this has shown that live action, there's still a thirst for live action Star Wars that doesn't have to be to do with the Skywalker saga. And I don't want them to touch the Skywalker saga anymore, really, apart from, the Kenobi series is coming out and the Cassian Andor series is coming out, like those sort of things. But like, there's too much baggage with the Skywalker saga at the moment. There's too many people whose childhoods they quote get ruined by the prequels, and then too many people who quote that their childhoods of the prequels and the originals got ruined by the sequels. It's like when you can just go, hey, look, Mandalorian, nothing. Luke Skywalker's not going to show up. This isn't going to show up. It's just a storyline that vaguely ticks and connects to things that were in the animated series. Then you've got gold, because you haven't got people complaining about Luke Skywalker not being the way they wanted him to be, or Darth Vader as Anakin being a whiny little bitch. Like, you don't have decades and decades of baggage to go along with it. You've just kind of got the positive nostalgia, and that's what I think they've just done. Yeah, I love The Mandalorian, and I'm so happy that it's getting a renaissance for so many Star Wars fans who, honestly, I understand why a lot of people have lost faith, because the sequel trilogy wasn't what everyone wanted it to be. So I appreciate that The Mandalorian has reinvigorated so many people's love of it. And speaking to people like you and obviously Scott and Dave and things, and just hearing other people getting excited for Star Wars, it makes me really excited. And doing this sort of show and things, and you guys doing the weekly Mandalorian show, which obviously I'll be on again at the end, it's just exciting to hear you guys talk about it. And on Mondays or Tuesdays, I do get very, very excited, where it's like, I get to see what Chris and Dave or Chris and Scott have been talking about. What are their thoughts on The Mandalorian? Like, I love hearing about it. So it's just a lot of fun for me as well. And I'm glad it's fun for so many other people too.
Yeah, it is. It's been absolutely brilliant. And as well, I've talked about the little nods to other sci-fi properties that, they do, like Tremors, like Alien. I actually think they did a like self homage as well. So when they're trying to escape in the transport, which again, very reminiscent of Rebels, the transports that we see in Rebels, just putting it out there. You think it's all done for, and then at the last minute, the last second, Mando turns up. He kicks the arse of all the TIE fighters. For me, that was very reminiscent of when Han Solo, saves the day in A New Hope. And you're just waiting for Mando to say, "You're all clear, kid. Now let's blow this thing and go home."
I agree completely. I think he does actually like woo. I think.
Oh, really? He gives a proper yoo.
Maybe not quite that extravagant, but I feel like he makes some sort of noise that is more than just the standard sort of the Mando only saying what he needs to say. I think he does like make a wahoo you. I don't think he quite goes yippee, but
I think he's so cool though, isn't he? Probably the most you'd get out of Nando is like, nice.
And that's how I describe this chat with you, Dave. Nice. Yeah.
But I mean, it's not all plain sailing, is it? Because they've put the tracker beacon on there. So old Moff Gideon, he knows where he's going. He knows that he's still got the asset. He's still got the child, or to you and I, Baby Yoda. So, yep, it's all building up. And like I say, old Dave Filoni is going to be writing and directing. This is his first one that he's written this series next week. So honestly, Mike, I cannot wait.
Mate, as like they said, Ahsoka Tano in obviously episode 3 of the season / chapter 11, and like I love Star Wars obviously, but Megan also loves Star Wars. She's been proper getting into it, and Ahsoka are two of both of our favorite characters. They're I don't know how I'm even right at the end. I've managed to trip over all my words. Both me and Megan love Ahsoka. She is one of our favorite characters for both of us, and literally when Ahsoka's name was spoken, Megan literally visibly jumped up, like she sat down like in a reclining sofa chair, literally jumped, went huh? like jolted in excitement at the screen, and that cracked me up being there, because obviously I unfortunately kind of knew she was going to be in it at some point, so it wasn't much of a surprise to me. But because it's written and directed by Dave Filoni, and he basically created Ahsoka along with George Lucas, and he says she's basically the main character in the Clone Wars series, and because it's been confirmed in Mandalorian, I didn't say it very frequently, but she does show up again in Rebels. I didn't normally like to say that because it is kind of a spoiler to what happens in Clone Wars. You don't know, oh, how does she go on? But obviously, now her name's in Mandalorian, and say after Rebels, I can say Ahsoka's in Rebels too. She's such a central character to the Clone Wars, and then she's important in the animated series. So it's very interesting and exciting to have a live action, an animated character come into live action. Because the only time, to my knowledge, that's happened before, obviously Bo-Katan got that, but Saw Gerrera. Saw Gerrera was actually in animated before. He's in the Clone Wars, so it's quite exciting to see. I just love it, all the things connecting.
Sorry, which one's he or she?
Saw Gerrera is in Rogue One, played by Forrest Whitaker.
Oh yeah. Oh, he's great in Rebels as well.
Is.
I tell you. Oh, he's so good, and it's his voice as well, isn't it? Forrest Whitaker.
Yes.
It's so unmistakable, and it's great to see him kind of before, obviously what happens in Rogue One, but
also his progression to that, because he's in Clone Wars in one episode, but when he was created in Clone Wars, that was before Rogue One was even on the table, because the first few seasons of Clone Wars was out before Disney did the new canon. They did, I can't remember what season it is, but it's a really good arc. But in Rebels, when you see him, he has this hologram thing you see of his sister, and that hologram is the character model, slightly upgraded, but that is the character model of the same sister that he has in Clone Wars. So they connect the dots so well there, but he doesn't look the same in Clone Wars as he did. But obviously in Clone Wars, he was like quite young, and it wasn't voiced by Forrest Whitaker. But then as he ages, and as you say in Rebels, they do kind of put him in there. But yeah, if anyone watches Clone Wars, you get to see Saw Gerrera pop up at some point. So it's just fun. It makes you, as you're kind of experiencing, Dave, when you watch, especially the animated series, all these little connections, it just gets you giddy. It's just like, oh, cool. Oh, he's in it. Oh my God. And I know that bit. And you can recognize little bits like Chopper is in Rogue One. Fun fact. He's on screen for literally like half a second.
Oh, you know what? I'm going to have to, I was thinking of it anyway. I need to go back and watch Rogue One, because of the kind of sequels, I think that's probably my favourite. I did like Force Awakens, but I think Rogue One for just a standalone was fantastic. But I tell you what, Chopper's my favourite, I think. Although I do like is it AB5?
AP5, but yeah.
AP5, yeah. He's just brilliant. Sneering kind of Alan Rickman C-3PO is just absolutely brilliant. Have
you seen where AP5, last thing, have you seen where he, there's an episode where he gets some time by himself in space? Did you see that bit?
Yeah.
That is one of my favourite scenes in all of Rebels, where he's by himself and he's like, oh my God. And he's like, oh my God, what am I going to do? And then he's like, wait a minute, it's peace and quiet. He's like, this is lovely. This is amazing. What is this feeling I get? This is joy. Oh my God, I understand now. And he's like so happy. And then they're like, the ghost cub picks him up and he's like, no, what are you doing? That's one of my favourite moments.
AP5 could quite happily sit in a Red Dwarf episode, I think.
Yes. Oh, that would be the dream crossover. I'd love that. Just Chopper and AP5 just tearing around the Red Dwarf, just causing havoc. Yeah. They're fighting with the what are the little the little droid hand things in Red Dwarf? The scootery, what are they called?
Oh, the Scutters.
Scutters, that's the one. Yeah, them interacting with Chopper and
or even Crichton. I can imagine they creating a mess, and Crichton would have a really hard time sort of cleaning up after them.
Crichton would not get along with Chopper at all. It would be the dream. Maybe one day.
Mike, it's been a long one tonight, so I think we should wrap up. So where can everyone get you?
Social media at Genuine Chit-Chat. I'm on Twitter, Instagram, and on Facebook. I post pictures from the Star Wars, some of the Star Wars comics and stuff as well. I post normally the covers and the title crawl, and then maybe the odd photo from the inside of them. I also, obviously, my other podcast, Genuine Chit-Chat, which I have a different person on each episode and things, and a lot of them recently have been very nerdy, so make sure you check that out. And yeah, anything for Star Wars, comics in canon, you can either follow Genuine Chit-Chat, or where else can you follow, Dave?
So you can get us at Comics in Motion P on Twitter or Instagram. Obviously, if you're listening to this, you know how to get us on the podcast. So Comics in Motion, you get all kinds of different shows. This is just one of many. And no, Mike, it's been absolutely brilliant to wax lyrical a bit about Star Wars. I think we've gone for an hour and 20. I could have quite happily gone for 2 or 3 hours discussing this one. So,
we'll save that for the finale.
Yeah, so all I'll finish off with, I'll say, may the Force be with you. Now let's blow this thing and go home.